Hi, my name is Ann Sermons Gillis, and I am with the Theosophical Order of Service in the United States. I have been interviewing people that have been with Theosophy for a long time and members of the Theosophical Society of America. But today we're going to interview someone that's not been in the Theosophical Society that long, and maybe we can find out what's attracting people to Theosophy. I really want to welcome this morning Stephen Braun. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Anne. It's really good to see you and to be here.
All right. So here, where do you live now? Speaking of here.
I live in New York City, and I am a member of the New York City and Washington, D.C. National Capital Lodges.
Okay. Well, were you born in New York City or did you migrate there?
I was born in Akron, Ohio. It's funny, my parents were from Brooklyn. My mother had a Brooklyn accent. I was born in Akron and raised in the Cleveland area. I moved back to New York area for an internship after college, and I've been there for quite a while.
Okay. Were you raised in a religion?
I was raised Roman Catholic, and it's funny, it wasn't until coming into Theosophy and that I understood Catholicism more. And it turns out it was a Franciscan order. It was very important to my family. We would go to church every week. But the version of Catholicism I got, I think, from my parents was broader than the exoteric, like stated rules. So my father and I would have discussions about, as a 5-year-old, the Trinity didn't make sense to me. And we would have discussions that I still remember. He would teach me things that I think were theosophical in nature, which was pretty cool. Also, in terms of my religious upbringing, my parents were flexible. They insisted on religion for all of my brothers and I, but they were flexible with what the spirituality entails and where it comes from. So, for example, I was on the swim team and couldn't make the weekly CCD, the Catholic after-school program, and they let me join a United Methodist group. So that's the religion or the environment I was raised in.
Well, it sounds like you had a pretty good experience. Now, your parents gave you an open-minded perspective. Were you getting that in school and in the actual church places that you studied as well?
Yes, I think the part of Ohio I grew up in, and at that time was, it was a culture that was open to the future, a culture that was open to change. The school system I went to, Cuyahoga Falls Public Schools, every fifth grader spent a week in the forest. They called it outdoor education. And we would learn photography and how the mold grows. And basically, to commune with nature for a week was the school environment and the community environment. I found being Catholic and going to church or going to CCD was the most restrictive part of it, oddly enough. And then I would come home and mostly speak with my father about the things that didn't make sense to me, bigger picture, and he would try and explain them. Another interesting thing that happened to me and that I brought back to my family is there's a lot of priests from the liberal Catholic Church in Theosophy, and that turns out to be a natural fit. And when I told my family about how they've changed the benediction and some of, it's a participation with God as opposed to this God that's judging single-handedly, it's been really, really cool. And that's something theosophically I brought back to my family.
Oh, cool. Well, could you tell us a little bit more about your spiritual search? You've been talking around it, but what was your personal experience of this opening to the divine? Or maybe you don't call it the divine, to the source, but to yourself, whatever you would call it.
For me, there was the openness that I think I was raised with, but rooted in Catholicism, to be clear. And I think Catholicism is a very beautiful, beautiful religion. And then I moved to New York and I was living in Brooklyn. And there was just a lot of energy in the apartment I was living in. And it was two apartments, one above the other. And I had a roommate named Bo, but being out of Manhattan and near Prospect Park, which is my favorite park in New York City, there was a lot of time for reflection. Now, on the one hand, I'm like in my 20s and I'm running around New York 7 nights a week because I can, and that's what you do when you're that age. Something was in the under my consciousness. I felt something brewing. I wasn't sure what it was, and I actually chose to stay home one weekend and just kind of let it take hold. And I went for a run in Prospect Park, and I remember it was Easter Sunday, and I was playing an opera program in my Sony Walkman, and everything was blooming. And I remember smelling the flowers and seeing all of the colors and like the way the animals and insects are reacting at that point in spring, like the height of spring. And then something just came over me. And it was theosophically, I would say it was kind of touch or king into with the Buddhic plane, because everything just became one in that moment. And this is very personal, but I'm willing to share it with Theosophists. I'm much more comfortable sharing it now, having been a member of the Theosophical Society for a few years. From that point on, everything was connected. And I didn't know what it was. I caught myself crying with joy. And I remember thinking, like, why am I crying? Like, pull it together, keep running. But it set off a search to understand what had happened. And so everything was changed in that moment. The search lasted 20 years. I went through, I don't know how many books. I went through, just, I don't want to call them dead ends, but like this wasn't speaking to me, that wasn't speaking to me. I then happened to come across The Secret Doctrine, and it's like, this is it. From the very first page, I knew. I did not know there were lodges. I bought The Secret Doctrine at Strand Bookstore, which is a famous bookstore in the Village in New York. I saw that it was published by Quest, so I started going to the bookshop on 53rd Street. Lynn Trotman, the president of the New York Lodge, became like this trusted person in my life because I would talk to her about what I was looking for. She would know what editions, she would know what authors. So I had found this body of work, not knowing there's lodges, that finally were speaking to me. And everything happens at the right time. So, this was about 4.5 years ago. And it felt like home in the teachings. One day I went in to talk to Lynn and I said, I'd like to read the Bible, but I would like the correct edition. What do you recommend? And that's when she said, we have a lodge. Why don't you come and join us Wednesday? And so that was in December 2020, and the rest is history.
Oh, wow. Well, it sounds like you've had quite a number of living teachers, your parents, you've had Lynn, and I wonder if there are any other teachers that have influenced your journey, your spiritual journey, and Blavatsky's book too.
Yes, I'd say having found Theosophy and then going from looking for what might be transformative, looking for what might apply to my inner wisdom, and running into all of these difficulties, I then eventually came across the body of theosophical teachings, and it suddenly I had more than I could. I had like 100 unread books right now. As far as teachers, I'd say they come in many forms. They're in the books. It's voices like, of course, HPV. I would count Alan Leo among the voices that have influenced me. Annie Besant, all the like core theosophical writers. And then I think moving on from that, it's like old editions of Quest magazine. The teachers are among us. So I feel like I learned from other theosophists. I learn at lodge meetings. There's a couple who have really stood out. And, I've been working with a teacher who lives in Texas, or a mentor of her. And I am in several programs with her, and she's shown me how to be an artist. She's shown me how to be a theosophist. Shown, but she's unlocked it. She's unlocked the inner knowing. That's been wonderful. There've been a few others, and I'd have to say there are people who are newer theosophists like me. There are people who are experienced theosophists. Yeah, it's like a family.
It absolutely is a family. It really is. It's amazing. Well, one of the cornerstones in theosophy is service. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts about service, and what kind of service are you performing, or do you perform, or have you performed?
I love this question because I'm seeing now, after being in the Theosophical Society for 3.5 years, that where theosophy becomes living is when we apply it in service. And it's hard to put into words, but I think you know what I'm talking about, or other theosophists know what I'm talking about. I take that, and then I think about how every one of us has our superpower or superpowers, and who knows what areas of life or what form it will take. For me, I think we all do service, which is in the moment, filling the need, helping the neighbor, taking care of ourselves is also a form of service. For me, as a photographer, I started to work with a process that's rooted in theosophy. So I take theosophical concepts from the ageless wisdom, and I convert the concepts to intentional camera movements, to post-production techniques, and I work inside forests. So that's taking theosophy both as a theosophist, both in our rest, converting it into something that I would call applied, but where the service comes in, and this is where I think we have to follow the inner voice and just see what happens, is the work is now helping park departments. The work is now helping the body of work, I call it, the ecology movement. There's a whole movement going on worldwide called Religion and Ecology, where what I would call theosophical concepts are being combined with schools of forestry or with schools of environment at major universities. And this work is supporting those missions. I've also found, as a form of service, the work is resonating with its own audience. And when I say audience, I mean, when we do service, it's not going to apply to everyone necessarily. It will apply to those who need it, and the universe will match us. So I've gotten, I work with forests. I got a book in the mail last year from a widow in Kansas, and it was her husband's guide to North American trees. And the work is resonating with something about her relationship with her husband. And so to get that in the mail, me that this is something, I don't really know what it's doing. And so the service is just putting it out there and letting it be. But I think we all have those abilities. It's about letting them flower.
Well, I know you're working on some other things. For example, you're doing some transcribing for the course that we're going to offer next September. And it seems like you are also doing that for on some other projects that you're working on. Transcriptions.
Yes. At the Partners in Theosophy program, we started to work with AI, and AI can be used as a tool for transcripts. We have to be careful with AI. It can go off on its own tangents. But I've found that at our lodge meetings or in the videos we have online, there's a whole body of work theosophically embedded in the interactions we have. So the course we are offering, we are taking videos and we will have transcripts of the videos. Or I've started with with Gwen Mayer, there's some of us are working in a very in-depth esoteric astrology in a very applied way. And to make transcripts of those courses, it captures the dialogue and then assists in further transformation. I personally feel that that if that's a form of service, it would be a form of service. We can take and create another segment of teaching and learning to assist with transformation for Theosophists.
Oh, that is really neat. How has doing service affected you personally? Have you gotten anything out of it? Is it just you're doing it for others and you don't get anything, or has that changed you, given you any insights, opened you up in any way?
I think the service combined with what we study and then what each of us learn on our own journeys. So my journey, the things I've learned, or what's additional information that comes in for us aside from what we study. Service has taught me to allow service to myself. When people want to help us, that's, service goes both directions. And so I will nurture myself. I will do things for myself, but I'll allow others to do things for myself. And I used to be very independent in that regard. And I'm finding that two-way of service something blossoms, something that's very centered and combining the duality and polarities of our life blossoms. And then taking those teachings or the wisdom we have rooted in, a lot of, we all read a lot, we study a lot, and to turn that into something real in the world has been quite amazing. I was in Washington Square Park in New York, where I'm a photographer, and there was someone who was camped out in the park, looked like they might be living there temporarily, and there was someone else playing a violin. And the person camped out in the park with a little tent, went and put $5 in the violinist. And is it service? I don't know, but it's a form of giving and taking care of one another. I think through service we learn that Theosophy is very living, and it's living through us.
That is so interesting, Stephen, because people have talked about what they've done, but you're the first one that's brought up the idea of service as being able to receive as well. Because what happens when we give, we burn out. So that is a great point about learning how to receive. You said you used to be really strong. You had to do it yourself.
Correct.
And now you've joined into a community. I don't think we can heal the sense of separation alone. I think that it has to be together.
Yes. And in my course, Theosophy, and a lot of us are here because we're going into this age, or we're transforming right now. And some people would say the age of Aquarius is here. Some people would say it's whatever it is, we are transitioning. And a lot of us, I think, are embodied right now as part of that. Humanity has to get over this hump. Service is part of that. And the age we're going into is where the individuations each of our individuations counts toward the whole. We are becoming one humanity in this age. And I find it really beautiful seeing the form service can take. I also feel very optimistic because the resistance to this transformation, which we might find, around us in different forms or shapes, or I see more people in service to others than ever. I think as Theosophists, we encourage it with what we do. I think as Theosophists, we have the benefit of knowing that this is leading us somewhere even more than just service itself.
So you said that you see more service than you've seen before. Do you think that saying anything about our culture? And if so, what is that saying? What kind of signpost is that?
I think it's a signpost of transition for humanity. I think it's global. I think we're interconnected now. I'll see a TOS meditation alert for something that happened around on the other side of the world within 2 hours. Where I see it happening and the signposts, I feel that as part of this transition, we're moving from a number of, I want to call them top-down models, where we have a teacher and we have students. We have the state, we have the citizens. But we're at a point now where humanity is, where every voice counts, where every experience counts. We see it. I think Theosophy provides the framework to understand what that is. I think the increases in service I see are people are not afraid to take a stand and serve. I think some of what I see is we see declines in attendance with exoteric religions, say. We see people and communities, countries, many people hitting points where the old models aren't working. And when the old models aren't working, we can either dig in or we can get out there and try and help. And so I see that latter taking root more and more. I also see that, and I hope I'm not going too far with your question, informing what we as Theosophists are here to do. The importance of our society, I shouldn't say the importance, the relevance. The relevance of what we have to share is more important than ever. It's what's going to get us into this new age as one humanity. You know, it's also interesting at the same time, growing up Roman Catholic, when I was 8 years old, you know, there were some Catholics marrying Muslims or maybe someone from Jewish faith. And it was still like very scandalous with the older generation, but the younger generation and my parents, it was, you know, you marry who you want to because you love them. That's all changing to the point where I went to a Rosh Hashanah service on Long Island, and at the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, talking about combined services with a mosque and with the Catholic Church. So all of these things are shifting, and I think there's an innate sense in us that it's through service that we get to know each other, and we'll get through this.
Well, that's amazing. No, you didn't go too far. You've spoken some about how Theosophy has influenced your life, for example, in photography and maybe in your open-mindedness. Can you tell us a little bit more, just or expand on those things about how Theosophy has influenced your life?
It's absolutely provided a firm grounding for someone who by nature is analytical. I don't need opinions to hang on to, but I like full systems that I can find my place in the system. And Theosophy, I call it airtight. It gives us that. I also have to laugh at my family because I've always, we all have our own individual journeys within our families and groups of friends. But I'm just like, you know, the only vegetarian and the one who's like sitting with books about Buddhism as opposed to this or that. I joined Theosophy and it's like going from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. And now it's like I'm surrounded by vegetarians who are reading the same stuff. So that's been a lot of joy and a lot of happiness. And I think in a setting like the Theosophical Society, where we have that sure footing, there's a space to acknowledge externally what our mistakes are. We're not judging each other. It's part of the learning. I hate to use the word safe space. It's an encouraging space. It's an encouraging space where my journey has my own challenges, my own wisdom, my own love, and Anne has her journey with its own same things. But when we talk about it and we're in the same room, there is that oneness. There is that sense like, I am human. I am human. I'll take it all. This is part of the journey. And I absolutely love that being a Theosophist.
Thank you. You mentioned that you go to the New York Lodge. I just wonder, what has the lodge, what role has the lodge, being a member of that lodge, played in your life?
When I was invited into the lodge by Lynn, it was beautiful to see the variety of people in the lodge, the different ages, the different backgrounds, a reflection of, all of this is surface, and here we are, each transforming. I think through that, there's several members of the New York Lodge who, like one member, he's a senior, and every couple of weeks I'm over for dinner, and he's mentoring me into these things. So that's been quite amazing. I also love a shared physical space. I know not all lodges can do that, but it's a real benefit in New York to being able to be in the room and sense that energy together.
Does it feel like a family? Does your lodge feel like a family unit?
It feels like a family unit. And I always say I'm a member of the DC Lodge too by Zoom. And that's also a family. It's almost like, you have the family and you have the relatives you go travel to, but we're all Theosophists. I'll also say, I think it's interesting too, that we're on our own individual journeys of transformation, and so are the lodges. So it cracks me up sometimes the way the different lodges have different personalities, and I'll take them all. It's really cool to go to a lodge meeting and see their approach to a meditation, their approach to material. And when you add it all up, it's the sum is greater than the parts, for sure.
Well, have you, I know you've been to some Federation meetings. Can you tell us about other places you've been other than lodge meetings, maybe the Summer National Convention, the Federation meetings, and how they have affected you?
So I will say, I think it's funny, you join, the Theosophical Society comes into your life, comes into one's life. And then it's all in, right? Because it's like there's unlimited, all of the things that have kind of the insight has been searching for, they're all here. And so the first year was me diving into every Zoom program and everything I could. I have found, I attended the Mid-South meeting. I think that was the first in-person meeting I attended in 2022, I want to say, maybe 2022, 2021. Having the different lodges or people from different lodges together created its own unity, its own sort of consciousness that would transform. I think going to these meetings and having a topic that's explored in depth is also transformational. So I went to the Mid-South Conference. I went again last year. I'm going again this year. I've been to 2 national conventions, and I've been to Adyar twice. Adyar, I would encourage everyone to try it at least once, because these are theosophical sections from around the world. And it just keeps growing and growing, this embodiment of consciousness. And different sections have different approaches. But I share information now with someone in the Netherlands, with someone in Russia. It's helping to inform what I think I can do here, both for service, maybe for lodge programs. We had a speaker from Russia talk to New York, but it's all about these shared or different perspectives. And I see this, the broader we make the consciousness, or by focusing in on one topic, we get a lot out of it. We get a lot out.
And so it sounds like what you're talking about is that joining in with these Federation meetings, these conventions, it makes us more of a global citizen when we're aware and we join with it, our family members expand. And
Absolutely.
that's really a benefit.
our family members expand, and then I found with each being that's regional or national or international, it resonates outside of our finite consciousness. There is a sense of that human stream. And there is a sense of that nucleus of the brotherhood of humanity. It's very palpable. And it just resonates deeply. It resonates at a very loving level.
HPB has called theosophy is altruism. And some people, altruism is a tricky little subject because some psychologists say that altruism really is for ourselves, that we do everything for ourselves to feed our ego, to make ourselves feel okay or better. I wonder what you think about altruism, and do you think that maybe that's not the whole story? And if not, what is the story about altruism? I know that's a lot of questioning, but maybe you could just follow the flow on that.
I think altruism, which can be interpreted a number of different ways. But in the end, altruism, I agree, it does serve the self, but it goes back to that sense of service, that by serving others, it's transforming the self. I think altruism is tricky in terms of the fruits. And, the further we go along in our theosophical studies, we learn it's a very slippery slope, these fruits, and they hide. But to learn to be selfless and to learn to be altruistic without thinking about this is the key. I think when we look at the theosophical paradigms, the planes of existence, the inner-outer relationship, the higher-lower self, the interactions with the rest of humanity, or even looking, these are all limits. These are all, when we talk about higher-lower self, implicitly there's some boundary there. It may be porous, but the boundary. And in the end, we are all aiming for, and we will all have to arrive at, as humanity, this unity consciousness. There are no boundaries. The field and the knower of the field are one. So I see altruism without fruits, and believe me, they do hide, but to the extent we can without fruits, as moving beyond that barrier, moving beyond that finite limit, extending beyond it into something else, and connecting my inner with that outer world. And we know it's all one. I think it's through altruism that we learn about the oneness, where we learn to pick out those fruits that we've inserted with our tricky, super smart egos. That's how I see altruism.
Yes, I call that kind of the theory of oneliness. And so what you're saying is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is like there, as Ramana Maharshi says, there are no others.
Theosophy has taught me that like our ego is very tricky. Stephen's ego is really smart. I'm here to tell all of you.
Absolutely.
Biggest workarounds.
Yes, ego takes the very brightest, hides it from us, and uses it against us. And so, yes, it is very tricky. I think you mentioned this before, but have you been able to communicate any of the theosophical principles to your family? Were they open to these ideas?
Yes. And this is like everything else, an ongoing journey, but there have been some really beautiful and amazing surprises. So I have a very close family, and I think in general, I do let the world know I'm a theosophist. I try to assess, what is the terminology? Where is someone at in their own life with some of our principles? Because if I have one friend that sent an article that didn't really have theosophy correctly portrayed, so I assess, like, my aunt, I told her I'm in the Theosophical Society. We're pretty close. I sent her a video from the DC Lodge, someone named Julia, she did a talk at like 98 years old about the Christ within us. And that was perfect for my aunt. I've sent other theosophical videos, like we had the Jude Curvin talk at 2 national conventions ago, a mind-blowing talk. And so I have a brother who's, all about Neil deGrasse Tyson and physics. And I sent him that talk. So I think I share it very openly. I do try to, and I talk with someone. They're interested in why I'm in the society or what it does for me. I kind of assess what their interests are from knowing, and then send them something theosophical that touches them, just like it touched me. I've started to be fairly open with it. I work with several cultural organizations. One is a very high-profile organization in New York, and I work with them on ongoing projects, but one was pretty much took up most of last year. I now have people in this cultural coming to me asking about theosophic principles, and I'll send them like a link to the Blavatsky net or whatever. So I've been surprised at how open people are generally to theosophy, to the concepts. I've been surprised at how ready people are. I thought, maybe the next step is to invite them to lodge meetings. Yeah. So I've been very open. It's been warmly received. It's been a nice surprise at how engaged people are about it. I'll get questions months later. People are using the material. Yeah. And I think it's further for me more, it's more of a sense that it's never been a better time for theosophy as applied in the world.
Wonderful. I think people are hungry for themselves, and there are many different paths to finding out who we are, but theosophy is certainly a grand and wonderful path that we've all discovered. I'm so happy to be there. Do you have any favorite books? You mentioned The Secret Doctrine. You may want to say more about that. Do you have any other favorite theosophical books or any other books that you have really enjoyed or that you recommend?
I might say I've whittled down, I'm focused in this lifetime as a theosophist on one humanity, on the Aquarian age, on what that means, how that's embedded in the writings. And so a lot of my studies have been astrological archetypes, evolutionary astrology, as embedded in the wisdom. So I find a lot of those writings, and this would be Alan Leo. There's writers who I don't know if they were members of the society, but if we look at some of the astrological writing out there, it's absolutely theosophy. It's correlated to religions. There's Isabel Hickey. There's Jeffrey Green. There's Liz Green. She has a book on Saturn. It's talking about religion. It's talking about astrological paradigms. It's very theosophical. As far as the core theosophical writers, I've found that they all have a different place inside me. They all have a home. I will say that I love the voices that they take no prisoners. They mean business. They are so positive. So one example would be Joy Mills. And I just see her going like this and leading the charge. And we this is life, and we theosophists. But there's this encouragement embedded in it. And so it's those body of writers, and I'll say Joy Mills as a top example, which really resonates.
Thank you. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything that I didn't bring up that might be relevant to you and your relationship with theosophy, or any final words?
No, I think the longer I've been a theosophist, and it's 3.5 years, but it's my home. I know it was like finding the family. There's so much depth, and I think there's so many different groups are in the lodges and tangential to the lodges. And I think, meeting you and the course we're going to teach in September is another angle to this. So it's been a real pleasure. It's been a real joy. I think now that we are able to connect as you and I are now, you're in South Carolina. I'm actually visiting my dad in Cleveland because I was here for the eclipse, is a reflection of how we'll move forward as Theosophists. And the more we just continue to connect dots and let them connect themselves, I think we are going into a new era. And it's been a real pleasure to meet you and with you also, Anne.
Thank you so much. Well, I really appreciate you being here, taking time out of your day. I guess you're flying back to New York this afternoon. And I just appreciate you taking time out to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne. It's been a pleasure.